Although he didn't recognize the restaurant itself, it didn't take Jaune long to realize the kind of place it was. It screamed exclusivity, from the orderly queue of well-dressed men and women outside, to the perfectly shaved and suited man with a clipboard at the entrance. He gave them a calm and polite look, but one that held just a tint of caution. People their age weren't common clientele, and he obviously knew that. The man was cautious enough to check their names first, however, which saved them any drama. Mishni and Mr. Ark, he read, eyes growing wide, and certainly not at the Ark name. Your table is waiting for you. If you will head inside, one of our waiters will show you to your table. Wiess nodded. Thank you. Thanks, Jaune echoed, then wondered if that sounded just too casual. The man nodded with the grace of someone who would have done it even if he had spat in his face, but otherwise said nothing. The interior was just as opulent as the exterior, and many of the people on the tables around them paused to look at the new entrants, judging them with haughty eyes. Wiess withstood it with ease, but his instincts flared. It felt like they were in a room of enemies. He didn't like feeling so watched. A young woman came up to meet them, a year or two older than them, with long brown hair tied into a neat ponytail. She bowed, wished the two of them welcome, and then showed them to a table off to one side, next to a window. The view was of a rooftops of Vale, on the second floor of the restaurant. No shops or buildings blocked it, and Jaune had a suspicion it was because El Estralos had brought all the surrounding land themselves. A menu was placed gently into his hands. I will be your waitress for the evening, the woman said. I will serve only you, so if there's anything you need or wish to order, you need only but raise a hand and I shall appear. Would the couple care for a drink? Couple? He wanted to dispel that notion, but hesitated. This was supposed to be a date between them. He supposed that did make them a couple, at least for tonight. We shall have a bottle of red, Wiess said, and also a pitcher of mineral water. The woman nodded and moved away, leaving them alone. Alcohol? He asked. Is that wise? We don't have to finish it. I, for one, don't intend to drink excess. Wiess's eyes widened. Is something wrong? Would you prefer white? I apologize. It was rude of me to presume. No, it's fine. I like red wine. He chuckled, wishing he hadn't opened his mouth. Damn it. There he went, instantly making the mood feel awkward. Wiess smiled and nodded, but with the question answered and the matter resolved, there was nothing more to talk about. They fell into a deep silence. It was not a comfortable one. He fidgeted with the menu, while Wiess looked anywhere but at him. Neither of them spoke. Damn it. Sable warned me about this. He had no idea how to break it, but wondered if the meal might help. At least with that, they could eat and not have to talk. He cracked open the menu and read the first page, then immediately cringed. Wiess noticed something. Is something the matter? I don't recognize anything on here. What do you mean? Crispy brick dough, suffused with Vulcan redback, foraged mushrooms, and sautéed cabbage, served with seasoned salad, capturing the essence of the barrick? Lobster roulade, Wiess said. He read off another, the name equally incomprehensible. Slow roasted duck, Wiess replied. I don't see the problem. Jaune's cheek flushed. The problem, he said, is that I can't understand a damn word on the menu. What on remnant is a carpaccio? Raw meat cut into slices. Why can't they just say that? Because it doesn't... Wiess paused, then sighed. You're right. I'm sorry. I didn't realize. She put her menu down. Places like this like to use flowery language and foreign terms where possible, mostly of the way of fluttering the clientele. By making it difficult to decipher, it requires a certain upbringing of education, which keeps out, well, I suppose they would call them riffraff. Like me. Not you, Wiess whispered. It was weak, however, and they both knew it. He didn't belong here. Let me order for you? She begged. I promise it'll be something you can eat. Trust me. The look in her eyes was pleading, desperate to not let this end their date before it could even begin. It was humiliating. Not the part where she had to order for him, but the fact he couldn't understand something that everyone else in the restaurant could. It made him feel uneducated, stupid. Of all the lifetimes he'd been through, he'd never visited a place like this. He was out of his depth. They both knew it. When the waitress came back with their drinks, Wiess rattled off some food for them. He listened with only half an ear, but what little he caught made no sense. They were freshly harvested vegetables wrapped in something, along with the essence of a fish. What was an essence, anyway? He kept a smile on his face and nodded to the woman when she asked if that was all. He then busied himself in pouring each of them a glass of red wine. Wiess took it from him with her eyes locked to the table. I should have thought this through, she said. I should have realized that I'm too stupid for a place like this. Her head shot up. No, Jaune, no. You're not stupid. This is just the kind of place you need a degree in language to eat from. I didn't even think about you. I wanted the best place, the best food. Her shoulders fell. I just wanted this to be a good time for you. I wanted to impress you. And now, he was defecating all over the place. He winced as the guilt hit him. He reached across with one hand, touching her wrist, which lay on the table. Well, we haven't seen the food yet, have we? Maybe it will be the best. Don't worry about me not getting what the menu says. I may not be posh enough to read it, but I can still eat it. At least, he hoped so. He had a feeling this place didn't serve steak or burgers. Wiess nodded. It was clear she still blamed herself. Time for a distraction, he supposed. Have you ever been here before? He asked. Oh, I've been here once before. I came with my father and sister a long time ago. She hummed. It must have been 5, maybe 6 years back. It was still owned by the same family back then as it is now. What were you in Vale for? I had a music instructor here, one who taught me to sing. It was to be my first performance in public. Not quite the kind of public event you saw me at, she added. It was a small thing, just for students and their families. There were maybe 50 people in the audience, but it felt like a lot more at the time. I was nervous. At least you had your family with you. I bet that made it easier. Wiess sighed. Father was called off for a meeting at the last minute. It was only Winter and my personal butler who saw me. Ouch. I'm sorry, Wiess. It's fine. Wiess shook her head and smiled. It wasn't a bad experience, and it helped me learn to face my fears, I suppose. Besides, I'm glad Winter stayed. She came to watch all my performances, and even watched them over the scrolls when she couldn't make them in person. You know, it's odd how close you two are. You're not as overt with it as I expect. What? Because we don't hug and tackle one another like Yang and Ruby? Wiess snorted, to show what she thought of that. Just because we don't feel the need to regularly reassure ourselves of the other's affection, doesn't mean we aren't close. Sorry, I didn't mean anything by it. It's... Wiess paused. I'm doing it again. She groaned, hands curling into fists atop the table. Luckily, the food interrupted them. The waitress came back smiling happily as she laid it out between them. Wiess had ordered him some kind of meat. Beef, he thought. It was fairly unrecognizable, but smelled nice enough, with various sauces over it, and vegetables he didn't recognize in the slightest. She had a fish dish, again with a name and appearance too complicated to describe. It was decent. That was all he could really say. It was probably better than what he ate normally, but not twice as good. and not deserving of the price tag on it. Then again, if you had money to burn, maybe you were fine with wasting a few thousand of line on something that was above average. They ate in relative silence, but for the occasional quarry on how the other's meal was, and him asking whether she wanted some more wine while he was pouring his own. He half hoped she'd dive into a conversation about something or another, but Wiess never did. Sable had warned him about this, but he wasn't sure what to talk about either. "Are you looking forward to the next fights?" he asked, a desperate move once the food was finished. "They should be fun," Wiess said. He had no idea whether it was out of politeness or genuine interest. "I think Yang and I would be a good combination. She's strong in the areas I'm not, and vice versa. I'll find out what I can on our competitors. I think you'd be enough on your own, but it doesn't hurt to be careful." "Absolutely. If you find anything, let me know." "I will." More silence. He wanted to take it and break it over his knee. When the waitress came back to clean up their plates, she smiled at the two of them. "Would either of you like any dessert?" He looked to Wiess for an answer. She sighed. "No, I think we've had enough." She nodded and thanked the woman, then paid the bill. An astronomical figure he couldn't have hoped to cover. But through it all, she kept her eyes off his and refused to so much as acknowledge his presence. He had a sinking suspicion he ruined the night. Wiess was angry, mostly at herself. How stupid could she be? How had she managed to ruin this so badly? I was selfish, she realized. A date is about making sure both sides have a good time. But I chose a restaurant based entirely on what I wanted. I didn't even consider that he wouldn't feel comfortable there. She spared a glance for Jaune, his eyes ahead of them as they walked through the park in Vale. It had been his idea, a way to prolong the evening. Yes, anything to make this a little longer, to give her a chance to rescue it. The restaurant had been a failure, a catastrophic one. It hadn't felt right for her, and clearly hadn't for him. The conversation, what a joke. There hadn't been any. She'd had meetings with her father's business partners which were more amicable. It hadn't just been awkward. It had been dead on arrival. This isn't going as I imagined it. What's happening? Where is it going wrong? Jaune was handsome. She's beautiful. The both of them dressed up and looking great. She did care for him. She knew that. But the dinner date fell through the floor. It hadn't been entirely him either. He tried his best. She could tell. It just hadn't felt right. Something was absent. Missing. "It's a nice night," Jaune said. Wiess looked up into the dark trees, with beams of moonlight shining through the cracks in the canopy. The marble path they strolled down was clean, the occasional sighs of other couples here and there. It was peaceful, relaxing, and the air was just cool enough to feel pleasant without being cold. "It is," she agreed. "It's nice." That was all it was. Not romantic, not the best moment of her life, just nice. She thought it would have been just as nice with Yang or Blake, or even Winter by her side. Her spirit dropped. This was supposed to be special. "Jaune, There was a click behind her. Jaune heard it too. Wiess gasped as she was pushed aside, a second before the gunshot sounded. The dust round whistled between them, hitting neither. Her shoulder hit the pathway, but her own instincts kicked in and she didn't stay there. The moment she landed, one hand slammed down and flipped her over. She landed on her feet, knees bent, eyes on the foe. Jaune did the same on the other side, one hand on his waist. Neither of them were armed. The hooded figure before them was. He had a gun in one hand, which was already tracking towards Jaune's position. She saw it in slow motion as people around them screamed and turned to run. Several didn't. They were all hooded, and they moved closer. "Jaune!" she cried. She needn't have worried. He ducked to the side, dodging the second shot and rushing forward towards the attacker. Despite the lack of his weapon, he was able to sneak beneath the hand as it fired a third, then grip at the wrist. He brought it up, pressed it against the shoulder and snapped it. The gun dropped, and Jaune swept the aggressor's legs out from under him. Wiess didn't get a chance to see any more before the others attacked and she had to defend herself. Her weapon was back at Beacon. She could have summoned it with her scroll, but that would have required a second or two to use it, something they didn't give her. She stepped past the fist, diverted it with her hands, and slapped the man with the back of hers. He staggered, and her hand stung as she realized she hit something hard instead of soft. A white mask flashed under the man's hood. The white fang. Rage burned up inside her. It wasn't rage at them, at least not entirely. She was furious about the date, her mistake, the stupid restaurant, and now these blasted terrorists wanted to interfere as well? Fine. They'd chosen a convenient time. She had frustration to burn. "Get him!" One of the faunus roared. Swords, knives, and clubs were drawn. Wiess huffed. I only count 8 of you. Are the White Fang that short of recruits? Or is it that we already dealt with the rest of you? They growled and charged in. Amateurs. Unarmed. She met them halfway. They didn't expect that. For their eyes widened and they had no defense prepared when she hit. Her slight frame and weight didn't allow for power Yang might have, but she made up for it in other ways and her sister had trained her well. Her heel dug into the knee of the first faunus, driving him down onto one knee. Her elbow crushed into the side of his head, her other hand catching his sword by the blade, somewhere near the hilt. Her aura flexed, protecting her skin and allowing her to wrench it out of his grip when it fell to the side. It was clumsy and a pathetic thing, cracked in several places, but it was metal, and metal would do right now. A club came in from behind. She heard the man grunt as he swung it. It slammed into her stolen sword, driving her back a pace from the sheer strength the man had. His second swing sailed above her, however, his eyes going wide as it caught nothing but her ponytail, dragging hair out of its binding. She swung up into one side, catching his wrist and causing him to yelp. They had aura, of course, but undisciplined rabble would still be just that. She caught the club as it fell, swung on the spot, and cracked it against the side of his head. The mask shattered, as did his grasp on consciousness. She heard a gun click. "Die, Snee!" Wiess's hand touched the floor as she fell, noting the bullet hit a tree behind her. A white glyph flashed into life beneath her, and when the gun trained back on her, she dashed to the side with ruby-like speed. Another glyph, this time to reverse her momentum. A bullet struck the pavement, chipping and sparkling, but with her erratic approach, it was all but impossible to catch her. She was in the man's guard before he could empty his clip, and she jabbed the crossguard of the sword into his throat. He choked and gasped, reaching up to defend himself, her knee buried into his groin. As he fell, squealing like a pig, he tried to grab and drag her down, but only managed to catch her dress. Just to make sure he didn't try anything else, she picked up his gun and struck him with the grip, knocking him out. Her eyes flickered to Jaune, concern running through her. A breath of relief escaped her when she saw him. He was fine. What was she even thinking? Of course he was fine. He swayed between two people, using a strange fighting style she'd never seen before. It looked like a cross between Yang and Ren, a mixture of brutal hooks and clever misdirects. How he knew it? Since he wasn't trained, she had no idea. She wasn't surprised though, knowing some bizarre martial art. Yeah, that was pretty much him in a nutshell. At this point, she wouldn't have been surprised if he revealed he was a martial arts master. He finished his two with ease, twisting one around by the arm and using him to block the cleaver from another. Blood flew, the victim apparently being without aura, and Wiess winced as the one who'd done it stepped back in fear. Jaune caught him in the jaw as he dropped the injured one. Wiess turned around, sword at the ready. There were none left. They were all strewn around in states of unconscious or injured, while sirens blared in the distance. Wiess sighed and threw the blade away. "White Fang," Jaune said, somewhat needlessly. "I'm guessing this is what Yang was trying to warn me about earlier." "She knew?" Wiess asked. She brushed some dust off her sleeve, then gave up when she realized the state she was in now. The dress was ruined. Why didn't she tell us? She said she would later. Didn't want to ruin our date. Wiess's gratitude was quickly tempered by bitterness. A fine job. She sighed. What a fantastic way to end the night. I couldn't have planned a worse date if I tried. Oh wait, I did plan this one, she added. Damn it all. Damn the White Fang. Damn her upbringing, damn those menus, and damn her for not thinking any of this through. Ruined? Jaune looked over to her. His hair was a mess now. All of Yang's effort wasted. His suit was ruined too, covered in splatters of blood and grime, and even torn in some places. She doubted she looked much better. Well, we can hardly go out like this, can we? She held her arms wide for emphasis, showing the torn cloth where the idiot had grabbed her, along with the grey streaks across her skirt where she'd hit the ground. Her shawl was gone too, ripped in two and discarded somewhere behind them. Would be kicked out of anywhere we tried to enter. Not to mention, my hair is a disaster. Really? Jaune reached out and took some of it in his hand. Her ponytail had fallen free, the tiara shattered. It wasn't as strong as the one she normally wore. I've never seen you with your hair down before. It looks great. I love it actually. He was just saying that to cheer her up. She crossed her arms. And you're about to say I look better with the muck and dirt on my face? She challenged. Or that my dress is improved with the application of several tears? He stepped a little closer. I think it suits you more. Excuse me? She raised an eyebrow dangerously. Would you care to rephrase that? No. He looked her up and down. This feels more like you. The Wiess I know isn't some pampered princess in a perfect dress. She's strong and independent. Someone who isn't afraid to get herself dirty if it means killing Grimm or stopping criminals. Huh? Wiess's cheeks darkened. What are you even talking about? He held a finger to her lips. The Wiess I know doesn't always look her best. Sometimes she's covered in sweat because she's training to be the strongest. She isn't calm and serene at a dinner table. She's passionate and full of fire. His smirk took on a roguish quality. Mostly at me, I'll admit, but I suppose I do enough to deserve it. She hit his chest. You do. You're a menace. And you, he whispered, are a huntress. You're a warrior, a fighter. You're not afraid to face what comes. You're not afraid to do what you have to do. You're not some demure and quiet girl who won't speak her mind. You're more than that. Here, covered in the rigorous of combat. Enemies at our feet? He laughed. This feels more natural. This feels like you. My partner. He pushed a little closer, and Wiess only now realized how close they were. Her eyes fixed on his chest, heart beating wildly on her own. Was he? Did he? She wasn't sure what she felt, only that her mind was swimming. The words, they shouldn't have pleased her. Saying she looked good when she was a mess was hardly a compliment, but it kind of did mean it. For her. She looked up at him too, his ruggish smile, the bruises on his face, his wild hair, not to mention the blood and grime that had practically ruined his expensive suit. She wanted to sigh and dab some of it off. But she didn't feel surprised, nor did she feel put off. This was him. This was more him than a miserable man trapped on the other side of a posh dinner table, unable to read the things on the menu. This was what she wanted. This was the man she wanted. Jaune was a huntsman. This was perfect, as crazy as that sounded. A park, a rush of adrenaline and terrorists knocked out around them. Jaune wasn't the perfect man, not in the terms she tried to force him into. He wouldn't take her out on dates, and if this was any indication, then she didn't want him to. Their conversation, though, as little as it had been, it felt more natural. She felt more relaxed. This actually was a better date than the restaurant. "You're impossible," she complained, chuckling as she rested her forehead on his chest. "You are literally impossible." "Me? Take a look at yourself next time." "I must have the most demanding partner in Beacon. I'm cursed. I must have pissed someone off in a past life. In all 1,000 more of them." He laughed, and the vibration of it rocked through his chest and into her, almost against her will. It made her laugh as well. It also made her look up into his eyes. Her laughter died off. Most of her thoughts did as well. His cheek was smudged, a mix of dirt and blood, none of it his own. His hair was out of place and sticking up, and his collar button was open. On the last bit, he'd probably done that on purpose, the idiot. She reached up to it. Her fingers started to tie it shut, but then paused. They spread along the collar and around his neck, past to it, to link her hands together behind his head. His laughter stopped as well, and he stared down into her eyes. She thought there should have been some poetry there, but she couldn't think what color they were. All she knew was that her heart hammered in her chest, her lips felt dry, and her stomach was tingling. She pushed up onto her tippy toes, then whined in her mind when it wasn't enough. He came down the rest of the way on his own. There were no fireworks, there was just her and him, the sweet smell of his sweat, and the feeling of his lips on hers. It was more than enough. Her hands loosened and tangled themselves in his hair, while her toes curled in her boots. She felt his hands come to rest on the back of her waist, and she made an appreciative sound as he pulled her closer. It let her stop stretching, allowed him to support her so she didn't need to stay on her tippy toes. Something clenched inside her when his tongue brushed against her lips. She wasn't prepared for it, but she opened her mouth nonetheless, trusting him to know what he was doing. A moment later, she approved of the decision, as the heady sensation he sent through her body had her groaning into his mouth. She didn't even care what he'd done to learn such skill, only that he used it on her. Her eyes were shut. She wanted to open them, to see and take in everything, but she couldn't. The feelings were too much. Her mind and body weren't her own, and didn't respond to her commands. It was incredible. It was unforgettable. Someone coughed awkwardly. Jaune made to pull away, but she wouldn't have it. She growled angrily, the hands in his hair gripping tighter. No, not after she waited so long. Not after all the crap that had gone on tonight. This was hers, and no one was interrupting. Excuse me, sir? Ma'am? Can we have a few words?" Wiess pulled back with a snarl. "What?" she snapped. "Can't you see we're busy?" The police officer flinched back. Around about the same time, she realized they were surrounded by uniformed men and women, some dragging the white thing away. And, oh dear, the police were surrounded by passerbys as well. some taking pictures on their scrolls. Wiess buried her face into Jaune's chest and whispered her thanks as he raised an arm to hide her face. Can we have a statement?" the officer asked, as if somehow didn't have the right to. "I'm sure we'll be able to let you go afterwards, but it's the law. I have to." Jaune was laughing. That absolute bastard. She stomped her foot on his, but that only made him laugh louder. "It's not funny," she groused. "Oh, it is," he said, unable to control himself. "It really is. This is the Wiess I know too. She yells at people who get in her way." Then maybe I should yell at you," she said, poking his chest. "If you weren't such an uncultured barbarian, you wouldn't have made a fool of yourself at the restaurant. My god, I bet the waitress knew. What do you imagine she thinks of me now? Wouldn't that be your fault for asking an uncultured barbarian out?" She glared at him. He laughed again. "Of course not. Sorry for thinking otherwise." She huffed. "Let's get out of the way, Wiess. We'll give them their statement and then continue into Vale." His words made her heart freeze. She looked up, eyes wide. "Not back to Beacon?" Jaune smiled. "I don't know about you, but I'm pretty peckish after that fight. I know a decent place. It's not fantastic, but they won't freak out at seeing people roughed up like us. Maybe we could catch a movie afterwards." He paused. "If you want, that is. A fast food joint, no doubt, followed by a movie in a cramped cinema filled with other people. If her father heard, he'd be disgusted." Wiess smiled. "I'd love to. Sir? Ma'am?" Jaune's legs ached, but it was a good pain. They walked for hours. It now being almost midnight and far later than he'd expected they'd come back to Beacon. Hell, at the restaurant, he'd had the sinking suspicion they'd been home before 8. The date had been good, honestly. Surprisingly good. The restaurant notwithstanding, it had been comfortable and close, filled with in-jokes and conversations. Some of it whining about Yang snoring, others talking about Blake, and of course, about themselves too. The awkwardness from before was forgotten, replaced with easy smiles and easy touches. Nothing overt. Their legs bumped beneath the table. Her hand would touch his when she wanted to say something, or he'd feel her shoulder against his when he laughed. He enjoyed every part of it. Every single part. And therein lied the danger. "Thank you for this," Wiess said as they arrived back outside their door. It felt strange, escorting a girl to her room, only to have it be his as well. That thought was dispelled by Wiess's wide smile, however. "I really appreciate this, Jaune. You have no idea how much it means to me." "It's fine," he said. "I enjoyed myself." That was the problem. "Even the White Fang?" Wiess asked coyly. "Especially them. They saved it in my mind. We should pay them back sometime." "Oh, I intend to." Wiess looked at him, and they both quickly descended into giggles once more. He hoped they didn't wake anyone up. Once they'd gotten under control, Wiess stepped closer once more. His nerves tingled as she reached out to take both his hands in hers. She had the softest skin, smooth and pale. A dark part of his mind wondered what her skin would taste like if he kissed it. Again, problem and danger. His eyes closed as she pressed her lips to his once more. It was soft and sweet, and far too short. He found himself disappointed when she moved away before he could deepen it. She smiled, a beautiful and happy thing. "Thank you," she whispered, and then slipped into the room. He let her go, mostly so that he could sigh and lean on the door. Partly because he was smarter than her and knew what would come to the first who entered. True to expectation, he heard Yang squeal and demand answers. followed by Wiess's panicked attempts to dissuade and likely dislodge the blonde. Wiess and him. It wasn't good. He'd made a habit of turning her down, and for good reason. It was too much heartache for him. It was a distraction, and he wouldn't be able to give her what she wanted. He was too messed up. There were 100 other reasons as well, but noticeably, none of them were that he didn't return her feelings. He did love her. It was obvious, really. His mother and teammates might act like he was an idiot for not realizing, but that wasn't the case. He'd known it was possible, since she was the girl he fell for originally, and he was still the same guy on the inside. More than that, he was someone who loved all too easily. He fell in love hard and often, and Wiess didn't exactly give him much room to maneuver. If she'd taken his rejection hard and backed off, he might have been able to resist. Instead, she pressed. His defenses were weak enough as it was. She toppled those walls with ease. I can't fall in love with her, he told himself. Not for the first time. It won't end well. Problem was, he was starting to think he'd already fallen. And that wasn't even the worst part. The White Fang. To her, it might be acceptable. They hated her, and both she and the team had caused them enough trouble to warrant an attack. He knew that wasn't the reason, however. Ruby caused just as much trouble and she wasn't attacked. In fact, the White Fang were particularly silent until the final attack. Their words had been too telling too, although Wiess likely didn't catch on to it. Get him had been the exact words, not get them. They had been there for him. It could only mean one thing. Cinder knew. She knew he was acting against her, or at least suspected it. The White Fang wouldn't have been enough to stop him, not if he had aura like she no doubt assumed. This night had been a lucky break for him. Wiess had taken out one of the gunmen. Cinder was testing him. She wanted to see how he would react, because even if she suspected he was interfering, she likely didn't realize he knew she was allied to the White Fang. Why would he suspect it, when they were a terrorist faction who hated humans? To her, this was a no-risk scenario. It worked and he was removed, or it failed and he was left none the wiser, but also potentially distracted by them. I'm running out of time. Cinder won't sit still once she realizes this failed. She'll make another attempt, and it could get worse. If I want to save them and make this life one that counts, I need to stop Cinder and her plan now. Jaune's eyes hardened. Cinder wanted war. He'd give her one.